Hello and welcome to Inside Veganism. This is the final episode of season 1. This is our studio series. We've now been running for, well, by definition, 2 months, 8 weeks. It's been quite an adventure.
It has.
We've spoken to some fantastic people and we're going to do so again over the next hour. And just before we bring in our guests, maybe just to explain what the future is. Obviously, I'm sure you're biting your fingernails. This is the end of season 1. What is the future? Well, I think we'd like to do some studio shows in the future. However, I think we're going to do something a bit different going forward.
Yeah.
For the most part. Some maybe shorter videos, some snappier videos, perhaps me rowing with people in my local town centre about the merits of veganism. Who knows what it might be, but something like that. We want to do some shows on location as well, perhaps at festivals or on marches or during activism events. But I think in the future, I would like to do the studio format again. But we'll do that, as a seasonally.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I definitely want to meet up with some people. It's already in the plans to meet up with somebody in particular and do some cooking. So like live footage of cooking, vegan meals.
I mean, my live cooking could possibly be, I could do porridge. I could do that live, provided a microwave could be used, and perhaps toast.
Yeah, toast.
Yeah. Well, let's have a toast to that. Okay, so let's bring on our guests. We are delighted to be joined, and I'll go with Umang Singh from New Delhi. How are you, sir?
Hi, I'm good, Aidan. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining me, man. I look forward to talking to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining us.
And we've got from Los Angeles, got John Oberg. How are you, John?
Doing great. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Thank you so much for joining us.
And returning to the show from the western part of Germany, just sort of west of Cologne. He lives in a city which my English tonsils cannot pronounce. So maybe he'll help me with that. Dennis Mee, how are you, man?
I'm fine. Victoria, Aidan, thanks for having me. The town where I'm in is called Bochum.
There you go. You've been told now. There's no excuse for anyone not to know where precisely Dennis is. So we've got an all-star cast. This is the season finale. And what we're going to talk about over the next hour or so is about activism. We're going to talk about perhaps the future of the movement. And one thing that I've always learned from doing podcasts is the most interesting conversations often happen before you start recording. And Dennis was saying something very interesting about the vegan movement, which will definitely extract from the pre-show and bring into this show. A very interesting point about potential divisions within the movement. And I find that really, really fascinating. So who should we speak to first?
I think we should go with John.
John from Los Angeles. John, you are something of a Twitter social media extraordinaire. And I think at the moment, one thing that you've posted, which is gone particularly viral, it's either a still or a video of a crustacean or a sea creature of some kind hanging on to a hot wok for dear life. It's a very, very powerful image. Was that something that originated with you, or were you the person that really sort of pushed that into the public domain?
I pushed it into the public domain. I was very, very disheartened when I saw it. I think that many people are able to kind of turn a blind eye to the suffering of animals such as crustaceans. I think a lot of people just dismiss them as not being sentient. And then you see a video like this and it kind of rocks your world. And that's certainly what happened with me. I saw it and, I don't think there's any reason for a crustacean to be holding onto the side of a hot wok like they are if they weren't sentient. And to think about, the fact that they're going to suffer a very brutal fate, it really got to me. So I wanted to see the world to see it. And fortunately, it went viral, and that was almost 5 million views from my Twitter account. And it's great to, as bad as, the way I look at it too is that as bad as the suffering is that animals go through and the massive amount of suffering that farm animals endure, in both in scale of suffering and numbers of farm animals, that also means that we have a really great potential to do a lot of good work for animals. So fortunately, I think that many people will see this, and that'll affect their behavior and affect with how they move forward living their lives.
It was almost it almost appeared to be perfectly orchestrated vegan propaganda. It looked so awful that you would hope that it was staged, if that makes sense. It just looked truly appalling. And it's really interesting that a creature that is so small, and often within veganism, we don't tend to talk as much about creatures that live in the sea. And it really pulled on the heartstrings. And I hope that some people thought twice about seafood after seeing that video, John. It was quite incredible.
Absolutely. Not only for this animal's suffering, but also because the smaller the creature, the larger the numbers of suffering. In the United States, 88% of farm animals that are killed in this country are chickens raised for meat. And often people, if they want to cut back on their animal suffering, they will often cut out red meat or pork first. And that, unfortunately, can increase the suffering. So it's nice to shine a spotlight on the smaller animals.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, John, did you want to talk a little bit about what it is that you do for your job? And I'm aware that you go out giving a lot of talks. And if you could talk a little bit about what you're doing with McDonald's. Can we talk about that?
Absolutely. So my job, I work for an international animal advocacy organization called the Humane League. We've been around for since 2005, but really came to our own in the last 7 or 8 years. And we focus exclusively on farm animals because we want to help the most amount of animals possible. And we work on, we basically work to make farm animals' lives less horrible while also getting people to make more compassionate decisions with their purchasing power. So in my role at the Humane League, I've been working at the Humane League for about 2.5 years, but have been closely involved with THL for about 8 years. In my role, I run and oversee all the Humane League's social media presence. So running all of our primary accounts, overseeing all of our local and regional accounts, and work to reach as many people as possible. In 2018 alone, we've had 239 million impressions of our content on Facebook alone.
Wow.
And I'm always working to increase the amount of people, the amount of engagement that we're getting on our Facebook and social media pages. And in my role, I'm helping to also facilitate a really big campaign that we have going on at the Humane League, which is McDonald's. We are campaigning against one of the biggest corporations in the world, which is McDonald's. And currently, basically what McDonald's does kind of controls the industry. And we recognize that the chickens that McDonald's uses for their meat are suffering in just massive ways, both in how they're suffering and in numbers. And we want McDonald's to adopt a suite of measures that are going to really reduce the suffering of these chickens. And when they eventually agree to the things that we want them to agree to, there will be it'll be a massive shift in the industry, and there will be a substantial decrease in suffering, which we're really excited about. So should anybody be interested in helping with this campaign, our website for the campaign is imnotlovinit.com. And that's lovin' without the G. So imnotlovinit.com. And then there's a hashtag, which is I'm not loving it. So search Twitter and Instagram for the hashtag and get involved with the campaign. We are always looking for more people to take action with us.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've posted one of your pictures below in the comments, and it's with you holding a sign saying, see what's really inside your Happy Meal. And on there, it's got the website address as well. But that picture, it's just, the Happy Meal, that just always gets to me.
Yeah, I was moaning today, as I am wont to do, about everything as usual. And I have some suggestions also about packaging going forward. I don't want words like Happy Meal or Happy Cow or the Jolly Pork. I don't want to hear any of this lying. I don't want to see any of this nonsense. I want to see pictures of the animal being executed, printed on the stack of bacon or onto the picture of any animal products that you buy. There should be none of this disassociation which these industries are allowed to propagate. It's obscene wickedness, and people should take to the trouble of finding out exactly where their meal came from. We attended an animal save today in our neck of the woods. We went to it was a chicken save, and that was about 12 hours ago now. And I can still feel the death.
It's horrible, isn't it?
And it was pretty grim. It was pretty grim. One thing about McDonald's, of course, is it's interplanetary. Essentially, I'm sure that there's probably a McDonald's branch on the moon. And of course, I wonder, Umang, how does McDonald's get on in India?
Like, people are crazy about Happy Meals and all those things that McDonald's sell. And yesterday I was passing by one of the outlets of McDonald's. There were like thousands of vehicles parked over there, and even driving was full. People are crazy about McD's food. I don't know why. Even after knowing like it is one of the worst thing that they're doing, but still they're happy to do that. I don't know. They are actually ignorant, I think so. Or maybe they care less.
And Dennis, I went to Berlin a few years ago, and yeah, there was a McDonald's everywhere, just the same as London. What's your sort of personal relationship with the Golden Arches, Dennis?
Yeah, so I think people are loving it here as well, sadly. But so I haven't been to a KFC, to a McDonald's or whatever, I think in 9 years. So not supporting them in any way. And I'm not sure if this is true, but I heard that in Bolivia, actually, McDonald's tried to open some shops there, but people were not going because they like to cook their own food there. And this is why there is no McDonald's in Bolivia. So I'm not sure if this is correct, but this is something that would be really awesome if people really care and celebrate good food that they cook by themselves, of course, cruelty-free, and then also have like a connection to their food again. And this is where those restaurants like McDonald's and all that kind of stuff will go extinct.
Mm-hmm.
What do you make, guys? I'll go to you first, John. What do you guys make of the direct activism in which an activist will go into a McDonald's, say, perhaps with a large LCD TV screen, which I did see live today? What do you make of that form of activism, John?
Well, speaking as a representative of the Humane League, I want to make it clear that we are not advocating breaking any laws. And I also find that we are not out to make any particular McDonald's employees' lives miserable. That is not the goal of these campaigns. The goal of the campaigns is to apply as much pressure as possible to McDonald's as a whole. So we prefer to have like our protests outside on the public sidewalk and really get a lot of media attention and a lot of eyes of the public on these protests that we have going on and different ways that we are boycotting and encouraging people to boycott companies that support animal abuse.
Mm-hmm.
Umang, have you marched into a McDonald's in New Delhi and you started using a megaphone and telling people about the suffering that's involved in all of those horrible little cardboard boxes? What type of reaction would you receive in India?
See, there are like few activists, those who are trying to stand outside McD here in McDonald's in Delhi and other parts of the country. People actually try to ignore us, and the people, those who are working there, they try to push us just out of the outlet, and they won't even let us stand there for a minute or so. And they're like, this is none of your business. This is our thing and we are doing it. You are not here to preach anybody. This is our life. And people actually badly oppose these things.
Dennis, McDonald's is, as we know, it's up there with Google and Apple and Microsoft as being one of those, well, most famous brands in the whole of human existence. So if you're in Germany and you're trying to communicate against the message being pushed out by McDonald's, what type of reaction would you receive in Germany for doing that?
So we have, I would consider quite a large like DxC community doing exactly that, going into McDonald's and all the kind of other restaurants. Personally, so first of all, let me clarify that I think we need to have different kinds of activism to reach a broad audience, because I think this is what we need to do, and I think we should celebrate diversity. Now, when I say my personal opinion on that kind of stuff is, I'm not a fan of that at all. So I'm sorry to play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because personally, I don't have a good feeling doing that kind of stuff. So this is my first impression why I don't engage in such kind of activism. And also I was trying to find some literature on that actually. And so funny that the topic is now already here, because I have a study here that looks into exactly that. And so it's from Matthew Feinberg and Rob Willer, who are both social psychologists. And it's called Extreme Protest Tactics Reduce Popular Support for Social Movements. And oddly enough, they didn't look into, they have an example here about animal rights activism here as well, although the study is not completely related to that topic. It's a general study, and they basically came to two conclusions. The first conclusion is that activists want to get media attention. And so the media is always covering like radical and extreme behaviors, which I would consider something like that as. I don't necessarily say there aren't even more extreme things that you can do, but I find them quite radical. And so this is where the media will get the attention to. And the other thing is they call it a dilemma in here, because when they were asking about how people who are not already convinced of what the activists want to, the message that they want to convey, they actually think the more extreme it is, the less they are feel to be persuaded by this belief. But when you talk about the activists who engage in that extreme behavior, they actually think it's more impactful. So basically, it's a dilemma of self-perception, and this is something that I found quite interesting.
Dennis, that is really interesting. There was something that happened here in the UK within the last couple of weeks, and I meant to address it perhaps 2 weeks ago, and I didn't. And I couldn't address it last week because it was Women's Hour. What happened was there was a vandalism hit on a butcher's shop in some obscure town in England, and someone had wrote a pro-vegan message on the butcher shop, all in red paint. And I think when we see that, our gut reaction is that's a positive. Wow, the message is out there. But when I began to think about it, I thought about, well, what will happen as a direct consequence now? So let's play the role of a consequentialist, like Jeremy Bentham, who we often refer to. If we play that game, then let's think about what happens to that butcher shop in that community. If you followed the Facebook thread for that butcher shop, everyone was rallying around that butcher shop. Everyone said they were going to go to that butcher shop more often. Everyone said that vegans are crazy. And we know that people use the excuse of, I'm not going to become a vegan because that's what vegans are like. And that's a terrible reason not to do anything. I wouldn't not drive because there's a bad driver out there. It's a terrible reason. And people use that reason for their own reasons. And we know what they are. It's an unwillingness to engage. But Dennis, I do share much of your concern there about what we feel in the moment to be positive, but what are the consequences?
Yeah, so I mean, what I personally think about that is it conveys a certain portrait of what a veganism is in the mainstream public. And so because by definition, extreme behavior is something that is not where the mainstream public is engaging in. And so I want veganism to be for like everybody. I want it to be mainstream. And so I think even if I, as a vegan, don't engage in such activism, this is, of course, because it is portrayed by the media. This is the picture that most of the public will have. And of course, I mean, who wants to be affiliated with a group that is violent and that destroys property and all that kind of stuff? So I think it's not doing a good job for the movement, but this is probably up for debate. This is my personal opinion.
I
John,
agree. If I could just jump in,
yeah, cool.
I agree with Dennis. I agree with Dennis, and I always want to say that I think it's very important for us to be effective advocates, not just advocates who feel like we're getting our voices heard. It's important to be effective above all else. So I think it's really important for every animal activist out there to look at the work that they're doing and truthfully consider whether or not that the work they're doing they find to be effective or to just make themselves feel good. And there hopefully is overlap. Hopefully it makes you feel good and it's effective. But if it's just making you feel good by getting some emotions out, how you feel, because obviously we're looking at the enormity of animal suffering and obviously it makes us all very upset. But are we channeling that into proactive, effective forms of communication and activism? Or are we channeling it into something that could be potentially counterproductive or a net neutral? And as some of the very few vegan advocates out there, I think it's important for each of us to be as effective as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been quite reassured by what you guys have said regarding that, because we discussed what was happening in England, and I very much felt that I was not, if not quite alone. There were very few people that perhaps shared some of the concerns that you chaps have just very well elucidated. Yeah. Umang, when it comes to direct action in India, what's happening out there? What do you see, and what are your intuitions about its effectiveness?
See, like there are a few activists that actually go to KFC and McD and do the disruption. It is what when we just go there, people are eating chicken or something that is made from animal, and we go there and put it on their faces that you are contributing murder, you are taking our lives, you are contributing to cruelty, and they're eating it. It is like making them feel low, and it is like we are being too offensive to them, and that is how they oppose us. We need not to make them feel low. We should make them feel better. We should do things in a different way that doesn't hurt them directly, but they should understand what wrong they're doing. Because if we just directly go and hurt someone like that, they will for sure oppose in some or the other sense. So they'll keep doing the wrong thing instead of doing the right thing. If we say no, they'll do it again and again. So what I think is to tell someone in a nice way, not just go and hit them directly. Because I've seen people they become rebellious when we tell them something that you are doing wrong, you are killing, murder, and all these things. They take it in a negative way, and they're like, it's my business. I want to eat whatever I like. So they won't understand what we are trying to say. So it's better to do it in a calm way. Like there are so many activism. Last year there was NARD, National Animal Rights Day. We stood there with dead bodies in our hands, and then we prayed for them. There were so many people who were actually touched with this thing, and they were like, we will try, we will consider going vegan. That was something I really liked.
Yeah.
Dennis, we've had a question. Yeah, Dennis, we've had a question come through. I'm going to slightly adapt it because it might just be me. I don't quite fully understand it, but the question is essentially, what do you think about the focus on animal welfare versus animal use? So I'm just going to rephrase that to a way that I think makes more sense for everyone, which is to say, what do you think about the focus on animal welfare as opposed to animal rights?
Okay, so my point on that has changed in the, let's say, past few months, because I am active I work for an organization who has an abolitionist standpoint. So, but I do see the point that, so for instance, the way the route that PETA goes is, for instance, if there is one celebrity who is not buying fur, but they are not vegan, otherwise they promote it. And so the reason that I think this is this can be a very effective way is essentially because what we want to do, we want to show the mainstream public that we as vegans are not so much different from you. And so I see why this can be a point, and I know that many also I think effective organizations are going this route. I personally think that it's a little bit more effective to make sure that no use of animals is justified and that we should always make that clear, because this is the only way how we can pay the real amount of respect that sentient beings deserve.
John, your Humane League links, is that a organization which also has a complete abolitionist stance also?
Well, in the sense that we don't want animals to be eaten, correct. We are abolitionists, but in the way that some activists have used that phrase, I will differentiate us a little bit. We recognize that basically everybody at the Humane League is vegan, and we advocate veganism. If you look at our social media page, you'll see the V word all over it. We really work to raise awareness about how farm animals are being treated, and to promote people going from the standard North American diet to veganism, at least moving along that spectrum. We celebrate all moves towards that. We also recognize that there are billions of suffering farm animals, and for many, many years, there will still be billions of suffering farm animals on farms. And with just minimal effort, we are able to make massive changes to the way that these animals are treated. Now, we do not advocate consuming, cage-free eggs or humanely raised chickens or anything like that. But what we do recognize is that if you could take an animal's life from being on a scale of suffering from like a 10 out of 10 to a 4 out of 10, that is a big achievement for those chickens that are going to be raised. And I think that if you were suffering the worst possible feelings that you can endure, the worst suffering you can endure, and somebody said that we can take your suffering, substantially decrease it, I think that you would be all about that.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, because the RSPCA in this country, guys, essentially it's the Royal Society. There's that word again, royal, which we were mentioning before the show. I'll try and not mention it again. It's the RSPCA. They're the Royal Society for the Protection or the Prevention, I should say, of cruelty to animals. And it's probably a net positive that they exist. It's probably a net positive for animals, because they talk about a certain standard of welfare. And of course, by definition, their standard of welfare falls below mine, because they're advocating ways in which animals can be slaughtered. Of course, certain procedures have to be in place. And obviously many vegans quite understandably detest the work of the RSPCA because they don't take an abolitionist stance. But again, perhaps we would do well to remember that it's probably better that they exist than don't exist. Make sure that Umang, are you still on the line, sir? I think we might have momentarily lost Umang. So, Dennis, I mean, you understand what we're talking about here. Do you want to perhaps talk to what we're talking about, which is to say, to a layman, what are the differences between animal rights and animal welfare?
So basically, animal rights means, so that would be, bless you, John. So that would be pushing veganism only. So that means that sentient beings have no right to be used, and this is basically what all vegans would ultimately agree on. And so this is definitely the goal that we should have. Animal welfareists are looking for like better conditions, like having more space for chickens, for instance, and have like better killing conditions. And of course, we as vegans know that there is no humane or nice way to kill a sentient being who doesn't want to die, obviously. But I think in the system that we're living in now, that is basically controlled by supply and demand, that we're trying to reduce the demand, and we can also at this point definitely do that through welfarism, because I think we must not forget, or we shouldn't forget, that actually we are the early adopters. So we are the first 1 or 2% of the world's population who adopted veganism. And so basically most of the people out there are not yet vegan and are not into the topic at all. So they're not conscious about the topic. And we must first raise the consciousness of the mainstream regarding that topic. And so I think one way of doing that could be animal welfareism. Of course, personally, I would have it best if we would implement animal rights and would have a vegan world, or at least a world where veganism is the main ideology and not carnism.
Umang, let's talk a little bit about what we mean by animal rights, because I'm sure that detractors of the vegan movement try and make out all our arguments as being preposterous and that we want to allow pigs to vote, for example. That said, they may make better choices than some of us do. But regarding your understanding of the difference between animal welfare and animal rights, what do you make of that distinction, and what do you think is important to make about that distinction?
Aiden, if I talk about India, like how things are going on in India, there are like animal welfareists and animal rights activists on the other side. Animal welfare is mostly working for the welfare of street animals and animals those who are in dairy farms and poultry, just looking after the condition of how they should be in a good environment and kept nicely. They shouldn't be harmed unnecessarily and all those things. There are so many animal welfare, different small groups of people, those who are actually working just for animal welfare, just for looking after their comfort of street animals. If someone is hit by a car or has some disease, they'll take them to their centers and treat them till they are fine. And they think like it is the best thing that they're doing, being a non-vegetarian themselves. And at the other end, there are like animal rights activists, like most of us are vegan. There are few vegetarians also, those who are animal rights activists, those who are working with us and trying to be vegan. Because ultimate goal of whatever, like even if you are an animal welfareist, the ultimate thing is to go vegan and end the cruelty of animals, not just making them feel comfortable and utilizing them. So,
John, you may have that's great, Umang, and that makes a lot of sense. John, I'm sure you've seen online, and let me know if you don't want to comment on the particulars of this case, but you may have seen online that DXC have found themselves potentially in some trouble regarding what they would regard to be a rescue and what a prosecutor potentially regards as aggravated trespassing and theft. What do you make of that case? And if not that case in particular, those types of cases or situations generally?
Well, I'm not familiar with enough about that case to really make any statements. What I will say is that the amount of animal suffering is so great in scale that we can work within the law to accomplish a lot of good for animals. And so I also want to point out the fact that I think that it can be easy to talk about the differences within the animal rights movement, but I think we have a lot more similarities between us than we have differences. And I think that the animal rights movement, from the beginning of it, has fractured off into different sections. And for some reason, we tend to spew a lot of negativity towards each other, all while the vast majority of society is over here engaging in their regular behaviors on a regular basis that are causing really terrible impact on animals. And so I think that we need to focus on the work that we find to be effective and really focus on the vast majority of people over here, the 97, 98% of the population of the world that is still consuming animals on a regular basis.
One thing that I've been reflecting on recently, gentlemen, is the fact that I never imagined that I would become an activist. And I think certainly at one stage I was very vehemently against it for a number of reasons, really. And it's amazing how quickly that has changed, whereby my priorities have changed so much. And I feel like I can't devote enough time to it. And I don't pretend to be even 1% of or as efficacious as you gents are, because your profiles are, speak for themselves and you do such impressive work. And I suppose the reason I say this is because I'm probably quite an unlikely activist, really. I'm not the most social person in the world. I have my own interests, and yet there I am out whenever I can, most weekends, talking to members of the public. And the reason I say this is because it's almost something of an appeal to people who perhaps thought this wasn't for them, who felt that they couldn't talk to the public or couldn't engage in activism. And even if you're not necessarily a great speaker or not a confident speaker, there is so much that you can do. I mean, for example, AV doesn't work unless you have lots of people willing to stand there still holding a mask, wearing a mask, holding the images and holding the signs. There is something there for everyone. So I'm not trying to say that it's a moral imperative that if you're vegan that you become an activist, but it's just an appeal to say that everyone is capable of doing it. Yeah. Absolutely everyone. And I just want to talk now about effective activism. So if you're willing to put the time in, what's the effective way of doing it? And if we start with you, John, what are your tips for effective activism, effective outreach, and communicating the message in the best way possible?
Well, for one, I think that everybody should kind of find their niche and roll with their niche. Really focus on like how you best interact with people and where you find to be like the things that you're doing that are most effective. For me, when I got involved with animal rights activism like 9 years ago, I started leafletting, and I really enjoyed leafletting at the time, and I found it to be very effective. And so I volunteered a lot, and I eventually got a job traveling around North America handing out leaflets at college campuses. And I think that everybody has their own niches. And I think that that's very, Dennis was talking about this earlier. It's very important to have a very diverse movement and diversity in tactics and approach, but really like just finding what works for you and doing as much of that as possible. And so as far as what I think is effective, I think looking at is what you're doing, getting people to make kinder choices and getting the end result. Again, it's not about our egos. It's about what's effective for the animals.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think let's have a look here at this question here. A comment from David, and I think being vegan is also a form of activism. David, I don't think you're wrong. I know that some activists get very sniffy about vegans who don't engage in street activism, but it depends how you use your time. I mean, one point I made today was activism isn't really something that you do. It's who you are. It's constant. So that is to say that if I wasn't out on the street on a Saturday talking to members of the public, there will be many times during the week in which I will be talking about it. I try not to play up to the stereotype. I'll try and be reactive to a question rather than going up to a bunch of people and saying what it is, what are you eating there? What have you just murdered? I don't really think that's the most effective way of doing it. But David, I think you're absolutely right. You can certainly use your time to influence perhaps your family and your friends. And sometimes the best thing you can do for veganism is just to be a good vegan and not be a dick.
Yeah, I agree. And it's like as well what you buy. Sorry, John. It's like what you buy, I said to some people during activism, you're voting 3 times every day to condone this animal cruelty, at breakfast, lunch and dinner. And, this is consumer driven. You can stop, minimalizing this. You can help stop it and drop it and, don't condone this behavior. I use that as an example quite a lot.
Umang, when it comes to activism, you are doing some types of activism that I can't compare that to anybody at all. It's very unique. I would encourage people to check out the comments thread on this live video, and we've posted a few pictures actually of all of our gentlemen here. Umang, how do you find yourselves talking to Buddhist monks about veganism, and how do those conversations work?
First of all, I'd like to tell you there are like 2 vegan. One is vegan monk and nun. Those were actually in our movement in Dharamshala. So this is one of the strengths of our movement there, because any question that comes from Buddhist perspective, like if they say it is okay to eat meat or anything, So that those monk and nun actually help us, because see, if if I preach something to a monk, they're like on a higher level than us, being a normal human being. So they're like teachers to us. So I cannot actually preach them. So monks and nuns, those who are vegan and those who are actually standing with us doing activism on the street, they help us to tell them in a more respectful way that Buddha actually condemned eating meat. So there are so many sutras in which it is written clearly that eating meat is sin. So so that is, and when I started like working, I'm one of the core members of Dharamshala vegan movement. So it was found 1.5 years back. And when we started from leafleting, as he said. So we used to think like it is the best way to do activism. And then we went out for doing public outreaches, public screenings, and most of the people living out there are monks and nuns. They used to come and we used to offer them vegan cake and soya chai. And they they used to always say like, why it is necessary to always speak for animals? Why not humans? They're like, why you are speaking for animals? Because people over here are eating meat. That is why you want to actually forcefully make them feel bad. That's how they actually take it to their ego. That's what you said. Like people, if we directly hit them, they'll take it on their heart, and it is like ego thing, and then you cannot go further. So we have one monk and nun, those who try to tell them as per Buddhist perspective, and they understand it. There are like so many more vegan monks now. Now they are converting to vegan. They have stopped eating meat, no dairy, and it's really nice. They are accepting the truth, because on every weekend I travel from Rajasthan to Dharamshala just to go out for outreach with the movement there, and people are now acknowledging us and trying to understand what exactly veganism is. They're becoming more affirmative about it. Earlier it was so hard. They used to reject us. They were like, we don't want to talk to you guys, just stay away, you are trying to make us feel low. They used to say that. And we are always polite to them. We make them feel nice as well as tell them what wrong it is, what wrong they are doing. So I think like people are all monks and nuns, most of the monks and nuns are very affirmative over there and understanding what cruelty is, what cruelty they are contributing to.
Umang,
So I
there's
think
a
it is.
picture I posted in the comments of yourself holding an animal that has passed. I'm not quite sure what animal it is. I can't see from the picture, but it's very similar activism to what I'd seen Dennis do in Germany. But before I moved to Dennis to ask him about a little bit more about the animals that he was holding in Germany, Umang, can you tell me a bit about how that was received in India for you holding these deceased animals?
Yeah, that was NARD, National Animal Rights Day. It was an
Okay.
event in NARD, and it is also coming this next month, only 3rd June. I'm again organizing it in Dharamshala. So it has quite few. It is the main purpose of that NARD was to. It was done in solidarity for the countless number of earthlings that are losing their lives and nobody is bothering about them. So
Yeah.
sensitizing human beings over there to make them understand the value of every life that exists on Earth, especially animals. So it
I
was
think
all
you
about that.
gents, I think you gents have been responsible for some of the most striking imagery I have seen online. John, we mentioned the crustacean on the side of the wok, and Umang, we've mentioned you with Buddhists who, of course, should be enlightened. So by definition, of course, they should be vegan. And Dennis, I mentioned to you the last time we spoke about that incredible image outside the Brandenburg Gate with all of you. I believe you were holding lambs. And that was a very, very striking image. But of course, activism comes in many forms. So if someone's watching now and they're desperate to become involved, what would you recommend? What's your Kickstarter for someone to get involved in activism?
Okay, so first of all, what I would suggest is find out what your strengths are. So basically, this is already something that John already said. So activism should come and is coming in so many different forms. And the way that you are going to be the most effective advocate for animal rights is if you are doing that fits your personality. It's just something that you are. So if you, for instance, if you're like to speak, you might get some inspiration from James Espy and other people who are great speakers. But if you're not a great speaker, don't try to be a James Espy. If you don't like traveling, don't be a traveling activist, for instance, like Joshua Entis is. If you are not able to dedicate 80 hours plus time and have like a team around you like Earthling Ed does, don't try to be a Earthling Ed. If you don't like to run an organization, don't be an Asal and a Paul who founded AV and other people who founded organizations. Do something that you love and do something where you're good at. And it comes in so many different forms. You can have like a social media profile, right? You can have Instagram feed. You can write a cookbook. You can write any other book. You can have a blog. You can have a YouTube channel. You can basically do leafletting. You can do outreach to people on the streets. You can just stand like we do with AV within a cube, where you don't have to speak to any person, just standing there and still being a voice for the animal. You can, if you're a filmmaker, you can do documentaries. You can help other vegans editing their videos. It's endless. And so basically, whatever you prefer, whatever you like, there is something where you can use your talents to be a voice for animals. And this is where you will always best. And if you do something that no other activist has already done, this is where it gets especially interesting. So don't stay away from being creative and find a new way on how to speak up for animals. It is definitely needed. Yeah.
And David mentioned also something which is quite important, because David talks about cooking vegan meals for other people. And that's such a simple thing, because I think, although for me personally, the food is the least interesting part of any of this. I'm not really much of a foodie, as you will attest, not that interested in it. I'm vegan for other reasons, but for many people, the entry might be via the plate. And even if for me, that's the least important part. So that's a great idea. Toby Brown mentions that there are so many ways to inform and spread awareness. And Dennis has listed several of those. We also had a question from Lance, and actually Lance made a few points, and I had that up on the screen just moments ago. And Lance was talking about the movement going forward, perhaps as a political movement, and taking a sort of educationist stance as well. John, I just wanted to ask you about veganism and politics, because at the moment it might seem rather an obscure thing to ask you, but you do have a US senator at the moment, don't you? You've got Cory Booker, who is quite outspoken as a senator. I'm not sure how outspoken he is as a vegan, but what do you think about the future of veganism and its entry into the political sphere?
It's a good question. I think that it would be too early for us to shift our focus from grassroots outreach and corporate campaigning to the political sphere, at least the Humane League. I think that in order to be effective, we want to focus on where we make the biggest impact. And I think currently making the biggest impact is the areas we're focusing on currently, which is raising awareness of how animals are being treated. And then, of course, getting the worst practices of factory farming to be a thing of the past. So I think that once we find that the most effective work that we could do is not in necessarily reducing the suffering of farm animals or increasing the awareness, then perhaps moving into the political sphere is something that we would look at.
In India, Umang, are there any politicians that are actively part of like a Green Party or anything like that? How does it work out there?
For now, like, if I'll tell you, I haven't heard anyone except people, there are few politicians actually just helping cows, not as, just cows, like they're trying to shut down slaughterhouses and leather plants and all those things. They actually, I don't think so. They're even aware of a little bit of veganism, what exactly it is. There are a number of vegetarian people and who are actually try to just protect cows. It's called, there is one organization that is Gau Raksha Dal. It's like just to protect cows. They don't care about any other animal. So they are not actually aware about anything related to veganism. I don't think
Umang,
so.
this focus of attention on cows, is this not to do with ethical reasons, but presumably to do with religious reasons, I take it?
Yeah, just religious reasons, because cow is like a mother goddess. She's like, they actually pray, and it is all about religious perspective, nothing related to, cruelty or looking at the tragedy they're going through.
Dennis, we know that Angela Merkel has been running the country since, I think, the year 1600, and she's likely to do so for many more years. But there is a definite Green Party focus in Germany because you have proportional representation, which, of course, we definitely need here in the UK. So do the Greens push vegan issues forward in the Reichstag at all?
No, not in that kind of sense. So if I want to be like really generous, I'd say they do something for animal welfareism, though I would say there are even a lot of arguments against that. But I have to say we do have an animal welfarist party. That's basically the name. And also we do have a completely vegan party also running. But I think the reason why they are not succeeding, at least yet, is because they are making veganism essentially they are making veganism their main focus. But obviously it's just, 2-3%, if I was generous again, here in Germany who are vegans. And not everybody, even among those vegans, is voting for their party. So it's not going to be a political voice. With that being said, I'm not a fan of, at least at this stage, making veganism a political movement at all, because there are already people saying that veganism is always political and that veganism basically is a fundamental leftist idea. And I disagree strongly with both of those statements, because I want to be veganism for the whole political spectrum. I want to have people on the far right to be vegans because maybe it's a gateway for them to reconsider their other positions. I want people in the center to be vegan. I want people on the other side, on the far left, to be vegan. I want everybody to be vegan. And so I think we're not doing a great job by saying that it's a fundamental leftist idea, because if we're seeing like the reason why, or that there people have objections against veganism, and you could make arguments that every argument or counter argument that they have is like a brick of a wall that holds them from becoming vegan. And by saying it is a fundamental leftist idea, they also have to be political left as a further brick that you have to take down. And so you not only want the other person to be vegan, but you also want them to be leftist. And I strongly disagree that this is a good idea to do, because essentially you're utilizing veganism to pushing your political ideologies, and I don't think it's doing the animals justice in the least bit.
If I could just chime in, I just want to agree with Dennis that this movement needs to be inclusive and recognize that we can't just expect one small percentage of the population who already feel strongly in so-and-so issues to become vegan. We need to be a big tent movement. We need everybody to be open to this idea. We need Republicans, conservatives, liberals, Democrats, everybody to it. And the nice thing is that this is not a hard argument. Everybody cares about animals. Polls consistently show that like 97% of people are opposed to animal cruelty. You can't get 97% of people around the world to agree on anything. Everybody is already on our side. And because of that, we should focus on making veganism more inclusive of everyone, not more exclusive, and focusing on like smaller and smaller niches.
100%.
In America, John, is there a sort of aspersion cast at vegans as being something of a hipster movement aligned with the far left, or does it have a better reputation than that?
I would say that is often the case. We're often branded, I guess you'd say left-wing hippies. And I know many, many vegans, and the vast majority of vegans that I know personally break these vegan stereotypes. While we may have a lot of similar thoughts on some things, we are definitely more diverse than given credit for by the general public. And I think that we need to work to break that stereotype as much as possible, which is why I agree with everything that Dennis just said.
Have a question here from Manuela. Hi there. What is your opinion on the release of animals we hear from time to time? We probably briefly covered this with respect to perhaps DXC and what was, depending on your proclivities, either a break-in or a rescue. I think we slightly covered that, but perhaps we could circle back and look at that again. In Germany, Dennis, are there many instances of these animal liberations and the hit reports afterwards whereby you see that an animal has been liberated from a factory farm? And how do you feel about that generally?
Okay, so generally, I know some of my activist friends who are doing that kind of stuff. And so I think it can always only be representative, because you can't rescue all the animals that are in captivity, obviously. But it's just a representative idea of having showing how the animal can now live without being like in a farm. It has enough space, it can be happy and lives a fulfilled life. And I think it might be a little different compared to other countries, but people doing undercover investigations, there has been some month ago, there has been a case at a court where obviously the farmer was going to court and accusing of trespassing and all that kind of usual stuff that activists face who are doing undercover investigations. And it has been through different instances of the courts, and basically said that because of the cruelty that they were showing through the videos that they released, that this is more important than the trespassing. And so basically they were not convicted. And this is also, I think it's basically seen as a case that can definitely be representative for future cases as well. So this is something that I really like, that now we're seeing like a little bit of a change, that we're not seeing like the commodity being more important than the life of an animal in that special case. And so I think it's a great step in the right direction.
Yeah.
As it's the season finale, we're going to run just a little bit late. I think it's certainly worth doing. I'd like to do one more question and then give you guys the chance to direct people to your social media channels. And Ronald says that many left-wing political people are vegetarian, not vegan, but the vegan numbers grow there fast as well. Just on the subject of vegetarianism, Umang, obviously there must be many people in India that are vegetarian. How do you go about convincing them that dairy ain't okay?
See, 90% of the time in a day, people are eating vegetarian food in India, except few things, that is ghee, that is the fat or milk fat, and butter and milk. These are the only three things that people consume daily, on daily basis in India. What I think the only way to make them understand is from a health perspective, for their own health, that it will make them better if they leave all the dairy and poultry products. Because people are selfish at the end, like they would consider being more healthy than what they are now. So that's what I always tell people on the street when they don't agree to the ethical point of view of going vegan. Then I tell them it is going to make your body so much better that you're going to live longer ultimately. And they do understand that thing, that it will help me personally. They don't care about the animal, but they care about themselves. So I think like telling them through health perspective is the best thing to make them understand going vegan.
Yeah, I mean, Umang, what you've just said, I mean, when I've done some activism and speaking to people going by, there was one lady in particular, she said, I just don't care about animals. I just don't care. And I said, well, it's like what you guys were saying earlier. You need to work to your strengths, so you need to try and pull on them any which way you can. And I just said to her, well, what about your health? And she was there with her child. I said, don't you want to live a long life, healthy life for your child, and be there, be the best mother you can be for as long as you can be for him? She went, yeah, I hadn't thought of it like that. So yeah, it's very interesting.
Yeah, if I tell you, like, personally, I went vegan because of health reasons.
Yeah.
I was obese, 106 kg, then I wanted to reduce weight. I started searching on internet and I met few vegan athletes and I started talking to them. It's just been like 2 years that I totally, got inside, like, I'm totally with this activism thing. And then I got to know that it is the real thing that one should do, not just health perspective or anything. One should be an activist and try to make people aware of the cruelty that is going on because of them.
Yeah, Eva has said, do we think that people who say they don't care about animals are telling the truth? Well, my quick response on that is I think it's just a distraction. It's just to try and change the conversation. I'm sure that no one truly feels like that. I can certainly hear a dog.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's
we have a a dog in the building.
Yeah,
that's fine.
Dog,
well, we're not speciesist. Everyone's welcome. No, you're fine, John. I want to talk about vegetarianism just a little bit more because we spend so much time trying to convert the most hardcore, bloodthirsty carnivores. Yet there are so many vegetarians out there. How do we get through to them, John?
Are you talking about converting vegetarians to vegan?
You got it.
Well, I want to look at the overall suffering and numbers of farm animals impacted. And if you look at a meat eater switching to vegetarian versus a vegetarian switching to vegan, there is a massive difference in numbers of animals impacted from a meat eater going vegetarian. Somewhere in the around 95% of one vegetarian saves 95% of the amount of animals that a vegan saves. So by getting someone to switch to vegetarianism, that is a big win for animals. I think that we shouldn't look at this spectrum as between standard North America or standard Western diet and veganism. Everything is a loss up until veganism. Everything moving along that spectrum is a victory, as long as we're not eating more chicken or more fish. So as long as I'm moving along that spectrum, those are definitely big victories for animals. Look, and I think that we do want to definitely focus on dairy and eggs, and we do to a certain degree. But in our everyday activism, we shouldn't look at vegetarians as losses. Vegetarians are making a difference for animals. And I think that the vast majority of vegans out there started out as vegetarians. So I think it's a really great introductory step into making a really big impact on animals.
And Dennis, what's your perspective on vegetarians and trying to convert them to veganism in the nicest possible way?
I actually really enjoy talking to vegetarians because I think one of the most effective ways on how you can do outreach is by looking at similarities in opposite to differences. And compared to the standard meat eater, vegetarians have a lot of more things in common with vegans than like the standard person, right? And so what I would always think is that they are already discovered that there is something wrong. There is something fucked up about the way how we treat animals, right? And so they already changed their behavior according to that. And that's great because we want people to change their behavior, and they have done that in the past. And so I think we have we have a huge common ground with those people. And this is why I particularly enjoy talking to vegetarians. And I think one of, if I want to call it like that, one of the mistakes that is often made is that we don't only want people to be vegan, but we want them to be vegan because of the same reasons that we are, and often forget that we have been vegetarian. So we haven't gone vegan overnight, although some of us did. But I think it's because even amongst vegans, those are a minority, and I can't really expect that behavior from the opposite person. And yeah, so that means even if, like Uma just said, so if you go for health reasons, if the person doesn't care about animals and you can get them through health, that's that's actually a great idea, because you're watching what is important to the other person and utilize that to be an advocate for animal rights. Now, granted, ethical veganism, or the reason why you're vegan, in the end, the goal should always be the ethical standpoint, because you can be healthy by eating one piece of meat every month, and you can have really less impact on the environment if you drink 1 cup of milk a month, but you can't ethically justify killing just a single animal. But I think it doesn't have to be the reason to start with veganism. It should be the end goal, but if a person is starting out with, or let's say plant-based for health reason, that's great, because I didn't start out for the ethical reason as well. But now I'm there, and now I'm an animal rights activist 24 hours, basically of my day, 7 days a week. And so this is where it can go into. And I think it's unfair to expect the other person to go vegan overnight for the ethical reason. And if we're already talking about that, become an activist. I think it's way too much.
Well, I really love your perspective on that, Dennis, and certainly made me think. I've often pondered the question of conversion, because I was vegetarian for a long time, and I was so self-assured that I was making a tremendously ethical decision. And I would tell people that, when asked why was I vegetarian, I would respond for ethical reasons. And I do cringe now when I look back at that answer. But it was offered genuinely at the time, and it was only through persuasion from an introspective standpoint that I was able to change. Funnily enough, vegan activists didn't get through to me for whatever reason, but I just wasn't in a position to be spoken to, I suppose. There wasn't really an activist scene in our town, I suppose. We are now the activist scene with a few other hardcores who are great to be around. Yeah.
But if I may comment on that, I think we're so quick to say that, oh, the other person wasn't open to what I had to say, oh, they didn't listen, but we never reflect on maybe we have done something wrong, and maybe we took the wrong path, and maybe we insulted them in a way that we don't think is an insult, but to them it's maybe offending, right? Because I think our beliefs and our morality are deeply rooted into our personality. And if we're saying, so if a person is now coming to you and you're a vegetarian for ethical reasons, and say, no, you are not ethical at all because you're still promoting animal cruelty, that basically translates for you into that person is saying, I'm a bad human being. And this gets up all the defense mechanism. And I think it's really hard to find like the sweet spot by being sincere about your intentions, but not to offend the other person. And I think it requires a lot of experience. And we are very quick to say, we have done everything right. The other person wasn't open, and it's their fault. And I think it's false.
Yeah. And to add on to that, I just want to mention, sorry to cut you off, Aiden. No, I just want to say that I agree with what Dennis said. And I think it's really important to drive the point home that we shouldn't be putting people on the defensive. When we put people on the defensive, they are more likely to tune us out and oppose whatever we have to say. So I think we need to come to people with compassion and empathy and understand that they are people who are just like us. And we were just like them at some point in our lives. I didn't go vegetarian until like 10 years ago. Before that, I was eating chicken wings all the time. I was eating, I had no problem eating dead animals. And now it seems weird to me, but it seemed completely normal to me back then. And we need to remember that the vast majority of the population is still completely okay with doing things like putting like dead chicken legs in their mouths. And that's normal to them. That's how they grew up and that's how they're raised. And that's just how society is. And we need to adapt to that to be effective. And remember that when we're talking to them, we need to remember to put them, not on the defensive.
Yeah, and I also think there is a lot of I've seen that meme now coming up a lot of the time, where and also people essentially have written that in their on their social media. The longer I am vegan, the less I understand how I could be non-vegan for most time of my life. And I'm afraid that this statement is true, but I don't consider that being something positive, because it means now I have lesser and lesser understanding on why other people are non-vegans as well. And so basically I get frustrated all the time when I come up with an argument and they don't just agree with me. And I think it's really bad if we lose the connection to the mainstream people, because we want to have a connection to those people because we want to convert them to veganism. This is our ultimate goal.
Yeah, some amazing points.
Absolutely. And to say, and just to carry on his point, like, I think it's important that we don't get caught up in these bubbles, in like a vegan bubble.
Exactly.
We need veganism to go mainstream. We can't expect the world to go vegan if we make it more and more narrow of a path. We need to make it more and more broad of a path and inclusive and open. And so, yeah, I agree.
No, some really powerful comments there. And yeah, we all need to remember our humble origins. And this is really more of a point for my main podcast, which doesn't talk about veganism, but I'm going to trespass on some of the points I make elsewhere here. I think we're living increasingly in an era whereby we don't want to talk to each other as fellow humans. We live in an era full of identity politics where each sentence is preceded by speaking as a. And the idea of us making progress with every sentence starting with speaking as a vegan, I think could be nothing but deleterious to the vegan movement going forward. I think the point about the longer it is since you've been non-vegan actually working against you being completely sound. Certainly my relatively recent experience of transitioning from vegetarianism to veganism, I'm still acutely aware of how sure I was as a vegetarian that I had done enough. And I do think that gives me just a slight advantage at the moment if I can maintain a humble approach. So when I speak to people who have that same opinion as I did as a vegetarian, that I can speak to them and try and nudge them. And I think someone said in the comments earlier, essentially planting a seed. I think that was what Eva was talking about, where she said that sometimes it seems like they didn't listen, but then they tell you a few months later that they're making some changes, and completely agree with that. A few more comments before we sign off. Milan makes a good point, and you're quite right. It's not easy to be patient when people are rude, but yeah, it is. It's so important.
Yeah, it is. You need to keep your cool.
You need to keep your cool.
Yeah.
Well, we've managed to keep our cool for 8 episodes of season 1 of Inside Veganism. It's been a blast. We will be back. Before we sign off, I want to go round and give everyone a chance to shout out their wares and to tell listeners and viewers indeed where they can find you online. Umang, starting with you, where can people find you online, sir?
Hey guys, you can find me on Instagram as Vegan Bearded Guy for daily lifestyle and vegan outreaches. I keep updating my posts over there, as well as I have a page from Dharamshala Vegan Movement with the name of Dharamshala Vegan Movement, and we are a small team that are actually organizing vegan outreaches, public screenings, and potlucks in Dharamshala. As well as you can find me on Facebook as Umang Singh. That's all social media I have for now.
Umang, you live up to your billing as the bearded vegan. You certainly have a very fine beard there. It's been a pleasure speaking to you, and I'd like to catch up with you again in the future, man.
Yeah.
Thank you
It was
so
really
much.
it was really a pleasure.
Great.
It was really a pleasure, guys. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Dennis, we talk again. How are you, man?
Yeah. So I'm really jealous of Uma's beard. Mine is not nearly as perfect.
It's embarrassing, Dennis, frankly. It's embarrassing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you can say
All
that.
I can grow is a neck beard. Nobody likes a neck beard.
Yeah. Yeah. So essentially, you can find me on social media on Dennis Me Activism. So that's Dennis with a double N and then M-I, Dennis Me Activism, one complete word. I am on Instagram, on Facebook, and on YouTube. And the organization that I work for is Anonymous for the Voiceless. So this is the organization, and you can just check them out on, you can check us out on Facebook, and you can check us out. We also have our on YouTube and on Instagram.
Dennis, thank you so much.
Thank you so much. You gave some really interesting points today. I'm really going to be thinking about them tonight.
100%.
For quite a long time, actually. Yeah.
Thanks for having me again. It was really a pleasure to talking with all of you. And hope to see you soon in the future.
Take care, man.
Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, John, it's been over an hour. It's flown by. Thank you so much. What's the best directions you can offer to people to find your plethora of work online, man?
Absolutely. So if they would like to connect with me on a personal level on social media, my handle on both Instagram and Twitter is my name, which is John Oberg. That's JOHN OB as in boy, ERG as in go. It's also my name on Facebook, which is John Oberg. And then if they would like to connect with the Humane League, which would be amazing, I recommend connecting with the Humane League on social media. We are active on all social media platforms at the Humane League. It shouldn't be hard to find us. And should somebody want to get involved with us on an activist level, which I hope some people on this hearing this podcast would like to do, you can go to fastactionnetwork.com and join the Humane League's Fast Action Network, where you can take simple actions online for animals. And you can also, of course, go to the humaneleague.com and learn other ways to get involved, especially if you live in the United States. But we do have a presence worldwide, and no matter where you are, we would love for you to get involved with our work.
Definitely. Thank you so much, John. It's been inspirational talking to you. It's really made me think again as well. So much to think about over the next few days, weeks, forever.
Well, I appreciate the invitation. Thank you so much for having me on your amazing show, and congratulations on a great first season.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, John. Thank you so much, man.
Take
Cheers.
care. Bye.
Okay, folks. Well, thank you for bearing with us, not only through a extended edition of this episode, but through an entire season. This is not the end. We will be back. We might do things a little bit differently in the future. I would like to do another season of studio episodes like this, but we also feel that perhaps in the near to medium term, we want to do some more, I suppose, street style live videos. I think that's the future.
Yeah, definitely on site.
Amongst the action. So again, thank you so much for tuning in this evening and for the last 8 episodes. If you want to go back and look at the archive, just head through our videos on Facebook, and there is well over 8 hours of fantastic conversations with not only activists, but also we've got scientists there.
Yeah, we've got scientists, cooks, chefs, musicians. We had somebody, a videographer. We've had bloggers. Everything. Everybody that Dennis had mentioned earlier, we have had on the show effectively.
And Sophia, yes, thank you very much. And without saying too much that you wouldn't want me to say, I know that Sophia, who has just commented for us to do more episodes, I know she has been working very hard on some very impressive activism, and I hope that works out in the near future. So from Aidan Coughlin.
Yep, and Victoria Pecci.
It's been fun, and we will be back.
Yeah, thank you.